Hello and welcome to the video. This is a video about these things here. These are the AG01 Hall effect gimbals, the latest ones from RadioMaster. Now I got a set in and I've popped them into my trusty RadioMaster TX16S. Let me just put that up so you can see it. Don't they look smart? And they feel as fantastic as they look. Now, for those of you that have been watching the channel for a long time, you'll know that this isn't the first time we've actually seen these gimbals on the channel. These were installed by default on the eSheen version of this very radio, a radio that RadioMaster actually makes for eSheen. And I really liked the way these felt. They are super smooth. And the other thing is, all these little holes at the front allow you to get in to adjust things like travel, tension, whether or not it's set up as a throttle, but you can change it around to feel exactly the way you want to. And I've been using these long enough to kind of give my considered review on my radio. And also I thought, while I've got this extra pair, let me also cover how they're installed in the radio, so I'll cover that too. Now, these are not cheap. These are pretty expensive gimbals. But if you want the ultimate gimbal for your RadioMaster TX16S, then these are the ones that you should probably be looking at. So let me go through with the unboxing and go through some of the specs, because they have put quite a bit of work into these CNC gimbals, and there's an awful lot more metal in here than there have been in the previous two versions of the gimbals available from RadioMaster. So let me show you how these come boxed up. Now again, I ordered the set, so this is the one for the throttle and for the other side, but you can change the tension and everything from the front. Now these are Hall sensors, full CNC metal gimbal, quad bearings in here, adjustable tension, and you can easily change things like the travel adjustment and the self-centering and everything from the front. Now let me just take these out and I'll show you how nicely they are packaged. Now these are expensive, but they do feel like really quality pieces of kit, even down to the way that they're packaged and put in the box. So to take the top off, you can see here that we have the gimbal itself, we have the little Allen wrench and a couple of pots, and we'll come on to that other stuff in a minute. Let's first of all get the gimbal out. Let me push it from the back. I don't like pulling from the stick. It just feels incredibly wrong to manhandle a gimbal like that. So take it out the bag and you can see how pretty it looks. The first thing you notice when you pick one of these things up is how heavy it is compared to the regular gimbals. This is CNC'd aluminium and there are plastic parts on it, but it just feels so much sturdier. And the other thing that strikes you is the nice finishes here and the stick that they've used, which is very, very aggressive at the top. Now, as I mentioned just a moment ago, this is kind of the third version of the gimbals from RadioMaster. The first ones were kind of out in the very first radios that they shipped. The plastics for some of the ratchet for the throttle, apparently there was reports of it wearing out. So there was a version 2, which is the one that's been around for ages. The one that was in my radio before I replaced them with these. So these are the V3s, and there's actually some extra stuff in here, in that there's also some cleverness to make sure that any kind of interference or noise on the centering of the gimbals is taken care of as well. So not only are they silky smooth, thank you to the bearings and everything they're using, there's also some extra tricks like these two little pots. One of these is a lubricating oil, which you can use to make sure that everything is running smoothly. And the other one is a damping oil. This lubricating oil is just, you don't need a dab of this on the parts that rub together. So this is the pot you need to keep safe in case you ever feel that things are not running smoothly. Mine was completely lubricated out the box, so I didn't need to add any of that to anything. I just love how this thing looks with all the CNC'd pieces. Much prettier than the version that's in the eSheen radio. The other pot is the one that's worthwhile talking a little bit more about. This is like really snotty grease. I'll show you how to use that in a minute. This is the pack. You can actually buy this stuff separately if you want to. If you have gimbals that are similar and you want to get hold of this stuff, you can buy this stuff separately, but it actually comes as part of the pack. Now, in terms of all the adjustment that's on here, all the adjustment that you can do is using the supplied Allen wrench, and the majority of it is accessible from the front of the gimbal, with the exception of how the throttle behaves, both the ratchet part and also the part that actually gives you the stiffness for the throttle movement. Again, you can just get to all of these pieces. Apologies for the green ink on my fingers, filling an ink pen this morning. It's gone all over my fingers, but you can actually change the way it moves. Now obviously this is the throttle gimbal here, but you can change how that all works just by popping the Allen key through the front and adjusting each of them. Now you can actually turn it round and see where all these Allen keys are connected to at the back of the device. But it's fun to kind of set everything up. Now I would personally recommend, before you install them into the radio, take some time and try and get them feeling close to how you like. I don't like a really stiff throttle, but I like one that isn't going to be bouncing around every time I put in a little bit of rudder. Similarly, the centering for me was a little bit too aggressive, so I slackened that off a little bit. The amount of travel, I'm very happy with that. We'll talk about the travel in a bit. These are quite wide sticks on here, the adjustable heights, and they do limit travel if you use them in the low position like it is here. But you can see here how this is just adjusting the tension. You can see the actual spring at the back, and you see how it's all working. So that adjusts the tension, and then one of the other screws then adjusts whether or not it is a self-centering throttle. If you get into a situation where the self-centering isn't completely 100% every time, that probably means that you need to unwind the self-centering screw just another couple of winds, and then that will get it so it springs back to exactly the center every single time, and you don't have this slight wander. It just means that you probably haven't unscrewed the adjustment screw completely, just need another couple of turns. In addition to the gimbals, the other thing that I got in here is this. I won't be using this in the radio, but this is a lighting kit. Again, available from RadioMaster. There are other ones about, but they usually need a little bit of soldering onto the radio, which is fine if you're very comfortable soldering, but if you're not, that could cause a little bit of hassle. Now there's a couple of clear plastic bezels that go around the gimbal like this. So you only get when it's in the radio just to see the outside. I'm going to use the bezels that are already in the radio in mine. And then in this other packet, we actually have the LED ring. They're single color. I think there's white and blue available. And that just fits behind the bezel and plugs into one of the spare ports that's actually on the motherboard. So there's no soldering at all with this. It's a really, really neat installation. Now again, this is one bit of bling too far for me, but if you wanted to do it and fit these LED backlights to your gimbals, maybe you like flying in dusk, then this is the time to pop these on. And again, this flying lead just plugs into the motherboard and makes the installation really straightforward. I'll point out where it plugs into when we install this in a moment into my radio. Now again, I'd recommend going and just taking your time and setting up the gimbals before you install them, because these two controls at the back for the throttle aren't accessible through the front. Now this is where the damping oil comes in. Now you only need a little bit. I would just put a dab on first of all, and you pop it in between the back of the throttle and where kind of the tension bar is, and you just kind of pop it on here and then do up the bar to see where the tension is. Now I originally didn't put a lot of this on here. There is also springs in the kit that you can use to change things, how the gimbal feels, but I actually ended up putting at least this amount again on this control, and the throttle itself feels absolutely fantastic. It just definitely keeps everything in position. You have to kind of overcome the tension from this particular it's almost like a like a Vaseline, I guess. It's like a very thick grease, but it does make the throttle feel absolutely fantastic. For me, I need this screw all the way in, but once it felt beautiful. And at that point, I'm ready to install it into radio. So let me show you how you do that. It isn't tricky. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to take out anything that's in the JR bay and also take off the battery as well. We don't want this powered, so I would just make sure that both of those are free and clear. Get yourself something soft to lean it against so you don't scratch the front, and if you have gimbal protectors, pop them on to protect the gimbals, even though these are going to go into the spares bin. Next job then is to take off the side panels. Something like a plastic ruler is great for just getting them started. These go around each side, and once these are out the way, then there's only 4 screws to take off. There's 2 at the top by either side of the JR bay and 2 at the bottom right in the very corners. Once they're taken out, then just undo the top 2 screws either side of the antenna and lift off that piece, and the back of the radio will come open. Once the radio back is off, I just undid the couple of cables that connect the speaker up. So to take it out, you just undo the 4 screws in the corner. They're easy to spot, and then once those are done, the gimbal lifts out and you can unplug the cable, and actually the free cable slot by the side there is where you'd plug in the LEDs on that main board. You need to keep the 4 screws separate and keep them safe. They're what you're going to use to put the new gimbal into place. These are self-tappers, so just be careful when you're putting it in. You don't get many chances on that. And you can see here, this is what the original version 2 gimbals were looking like. And here is the new version 3 AG01 gimbals. The finish and the effort that's gone into them, you can just feel how much nicer they are. Now fortunately, I'm not going to be able to use my coloured bezel because this is not designed to work with that. So I'm going to keep my other bezel in because it kind of goes to the rest of the radio. And I just need to slide this into place, and then once it's in place, I need to do up each of the 4 screws again into exactly the same holes, and you then need to reroute the cable and plug it into exactly the same point on the main board here at the bottom of the radio, as I've just removed the other cable from. So with that done, let me just turn it over, make sure that everything looks good. There we have it, 1 in, 1 out. That does look absolutely fantastic, and it just feels so nice. I just love how they feel and how they look. So let me do the other one. Same process as before. We need to unplug the cable from the gimbal from the motherboard, and then once that's free, undo the 4 screws in the corners, and then once you've got those 4 screws free and you've got the cable unthreaded, the whole thing will just lift straight out the radio. Now again, I'm not going to be able to use the coloured bezels, which is a bit of a shame, but these look fantastic enough on their own, so I'm not too upset about that. So again, this is the throttle all set up so that it's just going to drop straight in. The trick I'll give you here is that you can put one of the screws into position and then use that to kind of center everything and slide the gimbal in, and then it's just a case of doing up the screws. My trick is I always go backwards on the screw until I feel the little click, which means it's found the thread that the screw cut first time, and then I screw it in after that click. It just means then, rather than chew up the plastic, it's going back into the same thread that the screw cut the first time it went in. And then it's just a case of plugging in the cable, and that's the installation done. And it's just a case of putting the radio back together, plugging in the speaker, and then putting the back on. Take your time putting the radio back together. Make sure that no cables are being captured. Make sure that everything is going together without a fight. If it isn't snapping together easily, stop, take it apart, and double check that you haven't got a cable sitting somewhere where it's getting pinched by the back of the radio. Once it's all back together, then it's just a case of putting in the module and also popping in the battery. The last thing that we need to do is we do need to go and recalibrate the radio. The middle positions from these new Hall effect gimbals will almost certainly not be exactly the same as the ones that we've just taken out. So I'd recommend start the radio, go into the radio menu, find the calibration, go through that routine, and then at the end these will be centering absolutely fantastically. As I said at the beginning, I really like the feel of these gimbals and sticks, and I really like the way that you can tweak almost everything from the front, with the exception of how stiff the throttle is and whether or not there's any kind of ratchet. I love the idea that there's two kind of oils or lubricants in there, one for lubrication and the other one for providing a little bit of stickiness for how the throttle moves. I really like the way that feels, and that little pot is probably going to be kept somewhere safe for other radios that I have to use it in there as well. It might not be exactly what you want, but the fact that that customization is in there along with the other springs and everything else means that you can absolutely set these gimbals up to work in the way that you want and feel the way that you want them to. Because they're RadioMaster made for the TX16S, they do just drop in. They're a like-for-like replacement, so there's no soldering, messing about. The cables are the right size, the connectors just snap into place. It is a 10-minute job to swap them over, and that probably involves brewing the cup of tea as well. And having played with them here and also used them on that original Eachine TX16S that I first encountered the gimbals on, I can speak to the fact that there does seem to be less interference and noise. So they do seem to center really nicely, and I don't think that's just because of the mechanical way that they're put together, the CNC, the bearings and the other things as well, but I think there is some magic going on with the sensing and the Hall effect pieces to make sure that there's none of that jittering that you can sometimes get from a gimbal. Now, I can't speak to how these are going to last over years and years of use, but the high quality of these hopefully means that they're going to last a long time. The original gimbals in my TX16 were fine, but they just didn't feel as nice as these AG01 gimbals from RadioMaster. Only a couple of things to be aware of. Don't forget to recalibrate your radio after installation. You are going to have to do that. That might also slightly change the trims and things that you may have a couple of models, so keep that in mind the first time you fly after you've installed the gimbals. Don't forget you can't use the coloured bezels. I had to take mine out, so if you've already invested in a kit like that from RadioMaster, unfortunately you can't use those same surrounds with these, although to be fair I think these look really nice, so I'm not too bothered about that. The stick ends may be too aggressive for some. They are incredibly sharp. Now, if you are a thumber and you do lots of aggressive moves, if you're a quad pilot, then you are probably going to really like how they feel. But for me, I think they're a little bit too aggressive. They really feel like they're digging into your thumb ridges. So be aware of that. The other thing about those is that if you don't extend them too far, whenever you're doing this on the radio, it's always worthwhile just measuring what the original stick height was, and so you can try and get the new adjustment down so that it's as close as you possibly can get. But if you have the sticks relatively short, you'll find that they will bump into the corners of the bezel of the radio. So be aware of that. It might be worthwhile maybe limiting some of the up and down travel, which you can do with these gimbals if you're going to be pushing it right into the corners, and that's the way you like to fly. And don't forget, the throttle tension and the throttle ratchet still need the back off on the radio if you want to tweak those two things. So in summary, I really like these. If you want the nicest gimbals that RadioMaster currently make for your radio, this is what you want. They are expensive, but they work very well, and they feel absolutely fantastic. If the gimbals you've already got on your TX16S are happy and you have no qualms at all, then you know what? There's no need to go out and spend this kind of money on a spare set. However, once you've tried these, it does feel like you're going back to the cheap seats when you go back to the regular gimbals. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that if you're trying to learn a topic will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.